at home or on the go.
I saw it online. Talaga. Let me show you.
Watch your favorite Kapuso shows anytime and on any device.
Ay, oo, ito ho pala, malaking gusto.
Paano nagsimula? How nangyari sa'yo?
Did it all start?
Get the latest news and updates. Watch live performances. And share your favorite drama scenes.
Tuloy lang natin ang mga kwento.
All possible through our global partners.
Gano'n na lang yun.
Ganun na lang yan.
No more FOMO.
Baka pag tinuruan ko po kayo, baka hindi na po kayo mag-anchor.
Ganun ba yun?
Enjoy your TV subscription everywhere. Not yet subscribed? Visit our website and social media accounts for more information. New season, new administration, and new policies. Pagdating sa immigration.
Malinaw ang hangarin ng Biden administration tungkol sa issue ng immigration. Layunin nito ay itaguyod ang Amerika bilang bansang may respeto sa lahat. Aminado ang White House na hindi magiging madali ang proseso. Ano-ano ang mga programa ni Pangulong Biden na makakatulong sa mga imigranteng walang legal status sa Amerika? Kabilang ba dito ang ating mga kababayan? Ano ang mga reaksyon sa executive orders ni Pangulong Biden kaugnay sa immigration?
Pusong Pinoy sa Amerika Season 16 premieres April 4, Sunday at these times on GMA Pinoy TV. All the news you need to know.
Pinag-aaralan ng DILG. Natanggalin na ang ilang requirements sa pagbiyahe.
Nagbabala rin ng mga dalubhasa laban sa dumaraming kaso ng mga nananatili sa bahay pero nahahawakan pa rin ng COVID-19 ng mga galing sa labas.
Aantayin po ng Department of Health ang microplan na ginawa ng mga LGU para sa kanilang programa sa pagbabakuna kontra COVID.
Only on 24 Oras and 24 Oras Weekend. Catch it at these times. Eye-opening documentaries.
9 na taong gulang lamang si Amy nang siya'y mabuntis. Ang tatay ng sanggol, ang kanyang amain.
Binintay niyo po kasi ako na pag-exabang daw po ako sa nanay ko. Papatay niyo daw po sa nanay.
Madaling araw gumigising si Nanay Naring para maghanap buhay. Hirap po ang buhay dito.
Hirap po. Sobrang hirap.
Eyewitness on GMA Pinoy TV. At home.
Good evening to all our panelists and to our audience watching us online. I join you all in expressing support to the Asian American community in today's National Day of Action and Healing. It is heartbreaking to see the significant rise in racially motivated violence and discrimination directed towards persons of Asian descent in past years and more so during this difficult time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let us remember that during this unprecedented time, the Asian American community is standing here with us risking their lives at the front lines of the battle against the pandemic. They are healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, military personnel, and essential workers who themselves have become vulnerable and have likewise fallen victims to this pandemic. Instead of fear and violence, let us show kindness and respect. We should do our part in stopping the disinformation and educating ourselves, our friends, and communities. We're all fighting the same war, and we all have the same goal, that is to achieve a safer, healthier, and more prosperous environment for our families and our nations. It is our hope that we can all work together to achieve these common objectives while learning to appreciate the diversity that makes our people strong, thriving, and resilient. The welfare of Filipinos living abroad remains a top priority of the Philippine government. Rest assured that the Philippine Embassy and the consulates generals in the United States are open to all Filipinos and Filipino Americans who are in distress and in need of assistance. We have an established hotline for emergency cases, and we can also connect you to appropriate authorities and community groups that could offer further assistance and advice. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address all of you today, and I wish you an engaging and empowering discussion. Salamat po.
Alexa Alfaro here, representing the Asian American Pacific Islander Coalition of Wisconsin, based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The Asian American Pacific Islander Coalition of Wisconsin unites AAPI leaders throughout the state, serving as a conduit for AAPI communities and local, municipal, and/or state resources to come together to stand against hate and racism. Born out of a rise in anti-Asian sentiments tied to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, our coalition inspires action in and across all communities by confronting racism, connecting resources, and serving those affected by hatred and xenophobia. The AAPI community is emotionally and physically exhausted. We are tired of educating others about racism against our community. We are tired of carrying the weight of healing and protecting our communities with minimal support. We are tired of nudging leaders, organizations, and businesses to issue statements. Retweets, tweets, and Facebook posts are not enough. We are tired of being told that we matter, but then get overlooked and quickly forgotten in times of crisis. We are tired of being invisible. We have been incredibly frustrated by our state and local officials' lack of support in both parties following the shooting targeting Asian American women in Atlanta. It's time to step up and condemn anti-Asian racism. We need more than solidarity, we need solutions. If you choose to stay silent, then you are part of the problem. Thank you to our allies who stepped up and showed their support during this time. Thank you for reaching out, showing up, and helping to amplify our voice.
Hello, my name is Joshua Nang, and I am the president of the Harvard Philippine Forum.
Hello, my name is Angeli Macarenas, and I am the education director for the Harvard Philippine Forum.
The Harvard Philippine Forum stands in solidarity with the AAPI community in the midst of these horrible acts of violence and hatred against our loved ones.
Our people are resilient, loving, and strong, and we will fight together to receive justice.
Now allow me to introduce to all of our viewers, our special guest and moderator, Mr. Howie Severino. Horacio Howie Severino has been a journalist for 33 years and has produced over 200 TV documentaries, at least a dozen of which have won domestic and international awards. He anchored the morning news at GMA News TV for 8 years, and from 2009 to 2014, he was editor-in-chief of GMA News Online and headed GMA News social media operations. In other stages of his career, he was a newspaper reporter, book co-author, magazine editor, and a co-founder of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, of which he is still a chair of the Board of Trustees. He is currently a vice president of GMA Network, responsible for training and development of its journalists, as well as policies related to journalist safety. He was born in Manila, but spent a large part of his childhood and young adulthood in the United States, where he graduated from Tufts University in Massachusetts with a degree in history, magna cum laude. He was a college journalist for all 4 years. He received his master's degree in environmental policy from Sussex University in the United Kingdom. Howie then returned to the Philippines in his 20s and became a political activist and teacher before entering journalism full-time. He was a political prisoner during the Marcos regime and a COVID survivor. His documentary on his experience, Ako Si Patient 2828, recently won Best Documentary in the Philippines Gawad Tanglao Awards. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our moderator, Mr. Howie Severino.
Good morning from the Philippines at magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. I know it's evening where many of you are, so good evening to you too. Magandang araw po sa inyo, Ambassador Romualdez. We're honored by your presence. I'm honored to be moderating this discussion today on one of the burning issues of our time. In this event, my organization, GMA Network, is partnering with PhilPro, Filipino Young Leaders Program, which is an annual immersion program that aims to give 10 high-performing next-generation Filipino-American achievers the opportunity to dialogue and meet with senior government officials and policymakers, leaders in industry, media, cultural experts, and entrepreneurs in the Philippines. It's a program that's been organized by the Department of Foreign Affairs, administered to a great degree by the Philippine Embassy in Washington, D.C., and has the involvement of the Ayala Foundation. Like many other things, the immersion program has been suspended during the pandemic, and we all hope that it will resume very soon. GMA Network, my organization, has been a partner and host of PhilPro for several years as well. Today, for our panel discussion, we have a remarkable set of Filipino leaders. All of them, or most of them, alumni of the PhilPro program. I hesitate to call the panelists young Filipino leaders, even if you're all relatively young, because to me, you are leaders, period. As you know, Philippine history is full of remarkable leaders who just happen to be young. So that's you. We only have about an hour for this important topic, so we'd like our panelists to limit their opening remarks to 5 minutes each maximum. There will be time to elaborate in the discussion that comes later. There's been a focus on anti-Asian hate in America at this time. As a Filipino here in the Philippines, I'm interested in how the Filipino community in particular in America has been affected by all this, as we all have family and friends over there. So before our panel discussion, my colleagues at GMA International would like to show about 3 minutes of video.
Wala pang motibong masabi ang San Francisco Police Department sa pag-atake. Pero paniwala ni Danilo.
Kung ako ang tatanungin, palagi ko hate crime eh. Kasi walang nawala sa akin. Pati yung mga binili kong pagkain, yung wallet ko, yung cellphone ko na nalaglag sa sahig, walang nawala.
Ang nangyari kay Danilo, ilan lang sa mga sunod-sunod na pag-atake sa mga Asian American sa Estados Unidos na sinasabing nagsimula noong magkaroon ng COVID-19 pandemic. Base sa pag-aaral ng California State University San Bernardino, tumaas ng 149% ang anti-Asian hate crime sa pinakamalalaking syudad sa Amerika noong 2020. Nito lang Miyerkules, isang 75 taong gulang na Chinese na babae ang inatake sa San Francisco. Pero hindi nagpabiktima at nanlaban ng lola. Ang ending, ang 39-year-old na attacker na kinilalang si Stephen Jenkins pa ang naospital. Ang Philippine Embassy sa Amerika patuloy na nakikipag-ugnayan sa US authorities para matiyak ang kaligtasan at seguridad ng mga Filipino-Americans. Nagpapasalamat din ang ating embahada sa mga hakbang at aksyong ginagawa ng gobyerno ng Amerika para matugunan ang problemang kinakaharap ng Asian American community. Wala pang motibong masabi ang San Francisco.
Okay, as many of you already know, GMA has a strong presence in the United States. And at this point, I'd like to invite everyone, not just to join this panel discussion, but to subscribe to GMA Pinoy TV, GMA Live TV, and GMA News TV. They are available through various pay TV providers all over the United States. To know more, visit gmapinoytv.com/subscribe or follow us on our social media accounts at GMA Pinoy TV. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to go on to our distinguished panel. Just a quick rundown of who's joining us. There's Attorney Chris Lapinig, Dr. E.J. David, Ms. Luella Cabalona, Tony De La Rosa, Lizelle Tanglao, Ana Marie Cruz, and Dr. Allison Tantiangco Cubales. They are all high achievers in their own fields. I will let them introduce themselves, but I'd like to start with a question for Professor Allison Tantiangco Cubales. Professor Tintiangco Cubales, racism and anti-Asian hate in the United States, of course, are not new. What makes this time different? And at the same time, what does it have in common with what has happened in the past?
Thank you, Howie, for asking me this question. It's a very important question. So just to tell you a little bit about who I am before I answer, my name is Allison Tintiangco Cubales, and I come to you from a land stewarded by Ohlone people here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am the daughter of a retired janitor and an accountant at a local garbage company. I am Ilocana and also Batangueña. So even though I come here today, Howie, with a heavy heart, I am also humbled and honored to be here today with a panel of Filipinas, Filipinos, Filipinxs who are speaking against Asian hate. As a professor of ethnic studies and Asian American studies at San Francisco State, I believe that part of the process to end Asian hate means that we must learn about our histories of racism. We must also learn about our histories of resistance. So we've heard terms like anti-Asian hate, anti-Asian sentiment, anti-Asian violence. For Filipinos, Filipinas, Filipinxs, this started way before we even stepped foot in the United States. Colonialism and imperialism are acts of anti-Asian hate. The supremacy and domination that was imposed on our land and bodies of our ancestors is where the story begins for us. I know people don't like to hear that part of the story, but the point I'm trying to make is that the problem isn't just a series of incidents, which in my short time, I cannot cover the entire history of anti-Asian hate that I'm about to list. It is embedded in the systems and ideologies that dehumanize Asian and Asian Americans. And so I'm going to go through a few of the incidents. I cannot do that in our 5-minute time, but there is a long history of anti-Asian policy and incidents in the United States. But policies don't just happen. It's a reflection of our ideology and practice. Asians are seen as perpetual foreigners, as model minorities, and what Trump has said were like the Kung flu. Asian American women are hypersexualized and abused. Like all of this is what sets the tone for policy and the different ways in which we have experienced, racism and experienced anti-Asian hate. So it dates back to 1850s. The Chinese immigrants came here into the United States. Some of us know them as working in mining and railroads. There was a high demand for this dangerous low-wage work. Chinese immigrants were willing to do that work. Almost immediately, the racist trope of Asians coming to steal white jobs was born. In 1854, the California Supreme Court reinforced racism against Asian immigrants in People versus Hall. It was a ruling that said that people of Asian descent could not testify against white people. And this already sets the tone, because at that moment, there was this murder by George Hall, who shot a Chinese immigrant, Ling Sing, and the testimony of witnesses was rejected because they were Asian. So immediately, the rights of Asian Americans to be able to speak out was quelled. And then later on, we see this also in the 1800s. In 1871, there was this thing called the Chinese Massacre. At least 17 Chinese men and boys were lynched, including a prominent doctor. They were hanged across several downtown sites. Anywhere the rioters could find a beam, they would lynch Chinese Americans. 8 of the rioters were eventually convicted of manslaughter, but their convictions were overturned. And so we're seeing also in the legal system where we're pushing and we're resisting, but the legal system has not been to our benefit. So along with this anti-Chinese sentiment, it has actually been named the Yellow Peril. Yellow peril refers to Chinese in the US and the negative sentiments against them, but it also started to spread to Japanese, Chinese, Indian, and also Filipinexes. The most important thing to note is that the yellow peril sentiment reduces Asians to always being perpetual foreigners, never considered Americans. And the yellow peril sentiment then fueled a bunch of anti-Asian US initiatives. You may have heard of the 1875 Page Act, which was the first restrictive federal immigration law to the United States, which actually targeted women, Chinese women, and really talking about women's bodies. They were trying to, what they said, end the danger of cheap Chinese labor and immoral Chinese women. We later see in 1882 that the Chinese Exclusion Act then reached over also to Chinese men. So let's talk a little bit about Filipinos, right? And in relation to these laws. What ends up happening is it's not just the laws themselves, it is the context of the time. So along with Chinese Americans, Filipinos experience anti-Asian hate as well. Beginning on January 19th, 1930, there were mobs of 500 white people roaming Watsonville, California, surrounding the towns and farms, attacking Filipino farm workers and also their property. After seeing Filipino men dance with white women at a local dance hall. Now imagine that. Not only were they attacking, they also killed. In these riots, Fermin Tobera, a Filipino farm worker in Watsonville, was shot by a mob of white men. I mean, this keeps going on and on. The list keeps going. We are familiar with 1942 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, that the Japanese were also interned at that time here in the United States. Also in the 1980s, we know about the Vincent Chin case, where he was beaten to death by white workers from General Motors because they mistook him for being Japanese. In 1999, Joseph Aledo, a Filipino postal worker, was shot 9 times by a white supremacist because they wanted to kill somebody who was a person of color who worked for the government. And we know about September 11th and what that did to Muslims and South Asians who became the targets of backlash. I want to speak specifically about something that happened in the Philippines. October 11th, 2014, the death of Jennifer Loud, a 26-year-old Filipina trans woman who was killed by Joseph Scott Pemberman, a 19-year-old Lance Corporal in the US Marine Corps. Now, he was charged, but in 2000, Duterte granted an absolute pardon to Pemberton, and that's really problematic in terms of our response to that. So on December 23rd, 2020, I'm bringing us up to date now, Angelo Quinto, a 30-year-old Filipino-American veteran, an Antioch resident here near where I live, was having a mental health crisis. His family called 911 and the Antioch police arrived. They grabbed him from his mother's embrace, and Angelo pleaded for his life, said, "Don't kill me." The police continued to handcuff him, kneeled on his neck for over 5 minutes and until he stopped breathing. And they brought him to the hospital, and 3 days later, he passed. Now, from March 2020 to today, there have been 3,800 reported cases of anti-Asian violence in the United States, which is an increase of 150%. Now, these are our lolos and our lolas, our parents, our aunties, our uncles, our cousins, our siblings. Even yesterday, Jessica de Malanta was shot in the eye at a stop sign right here in San Francisco. Now, I listed a bunch of different things, different events that shows how Asian Americans have been dehumanized, attacked, and even put to death. But I just want to emphasize that at each of these moments, Asian Americans, Filipino Americans, our ancestors have resisted and fought back. Important to notice that we fought back, because oftentimes we're expected to be silent. And at this time, we cannot be silent. Silence is dangerous, and we must not be invisible.
Yeah,
thank
you. Thank you, Allison. Yeah, gosh. Thank you for providing that rich context that shows that what we're seeing today has deep roots in Philippine American history. It's shocking that a lot of this is still going on today. We want to take advantage of Ambassador Romualdez's presence. We don't know how long he's going to be with us, but perhaps, Mr. Ambassador, can you share some thoughts about what's going on in America, in particular within the Filipino community in the United States?
Well, thank you very much, Howie. Well, first of all, let me just greet all those who are viewing this event, especially the Filipino young leaders who are present here. And I'd like to congratulate them for the good work that they've been doing with the Filipino communities. Well, just to share with you, we at the embassy have been hearing a lot about this anti-Asian or hate crimes. And as early as September of last year, we already had called the attention of the State Department, whom we deal with regularly here in Washington, D.C., regarding this hate crimes and especially the racial slurs that have been hurled at Filipino Americans. And we were quite concerned about this already then. And of course, this has escalated into some violent crimes that have been committed, especially the one that happened in New York, a picture of which you saw there. And our consulate in New York, of course, immediately informed us. And that's the time when we sent a formal note verbal to the State Department expressing our deep concern on the kind of crimes that are being committed against our Filipino Americans here in the United States. We also wrote a letter to several senators, especially Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois, who is the chairman of the Committee on Justice. And fortunately, he called a committee hearing where he had the FBI director present, and he specifically mentioned the hate crimes that are being committed against Asian Americans. So this is the moves that we've made here in Washington, D.C., and I know that they are working on it, and that we were assured by the law enforcement authorities that in each area, especially in California, where many of these crimes are being committed, they're especially giving it special concern. And we continue to monitor this, and we urge many of our Filipino American associations here in the United States to tell us and let us know if there's any incident that might happen, but at the same time be proactive in watching out for their fellow kababayans here in the United States because as very well said by Allison, that this has been going on for a long time, but this time it's even escalated into something far more serious, especially the ones that have been committed recently. The one in San Francisco, for instance, is another incident that just happened just a few days ago. We will continue to do what we can and informing the authorities here in Washington, D.C., and to be especially pay attention to the kind of hate crimes that are being committed. The other day, we had a meeting with my colleagues, the ASEAN ambassadors here. We're 10 of us, members of the ASEAN Ambassadors Association here in Washington, D.C., and sometime this week, we're going to have a meeting with the White House. And we have all collectively agreed that we are going to inform the White House and express our deep concern with the continuing violence against Asian Americans. The Vietnamese ambassador and the Thai ambassador reported incidents that are happening to their own citizens. And also many of the other ASEAN countries have expressed that, the ambassadors have expressed that. So we're working to make sure that the authorities don't let up on these concerns, and that we're hoping that many of you will continue to be vigilant. One advice, though, that I can give to many of our Philams is that when confronted by these issues, if they throw racial slurs at you, the first thing you would do is if you have which I'm sure you have, a telephone with a camera, you try to take their photo as quickly as possible, but do not confront them because they could turn violent. Just take their photos, and if you can, video, And this has worked very well, actually. When you report it to the authorities, they can immediately identify them, at least from the video, and that they will be able to use that as evidence against this. It is a crime to throw racial slurs against fellow Americans, and especially the anti-hate crimes, and anything related to that is a federal crime. So that's the only advice that we can give to our friends and our fellow Philams here in the United States.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, for that advice, and thank you for attending this event. I hope you can stick around and listen to our other speakers. Thank you for everything that you and
Yes.
the embassy have been doing.
I will be around Howie for a while, but I have to peel off in maybe a couple of more rounds of your questions because I have another call. As you know, we're operating almost 24 hours now in the sense that Manila time is nighttime here. So we have to talk to some of the people there, especially at this time. I'm sorry to tell you this, but we are at a very critical situation in the Philippines now because of the COVID surge. And so we are coordinating with many of our authorities there on how we can best try to work on getting more vaccines available to our Filipinos in the Philippines. So that's the reason why we've been quite busy actually with this other very important issue aside from this hate crimes. So thank you very much for inviting me also, Howie. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. We appreciate any time you can give us, and thank you for bringing that up because that's something we here in the Philippines are really, really concerned about. We're in the middle of perhaps a bigger emergency than what we had at the worst of times last year. So thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for thinking of us over here. So the next question in this panel discussion is for US-based journalist Lizelle Tanglao, who will say a little bit about herself before answering the question. So our question is, why are Asians and Filipinos in general often called the invisible minority in the United States? Lizelle.
Hi, Howie. Thanks for having us here, and I'm honored to be here with everyone else. My name is Lizelle Tanglao, and I've been a journalist the last 17 years. I've worked at a dozen places, both on the local level, national, as well as global. So I've been on the forefront of trying to get our stories out there. It's interesting when you think about it. When you think about the word invisibility, that's the reason I became a journalist in the first place, because I didn't see any stories about my community or anybody that looked like me. So, I think a lot of what Allison had mentioned before really has contributed to the invisibility of our community because we're just not in the narrative at all. Oftentimes we fall into two camps. Either we're in the model minority sector where, and which is not completely true, because we're not a monolith, but we fall into that. And those stories are never really float up to the surface. Or, we're just not deemed necessarily newsworthy. And that's something that I've been trying to fight for in every newsroom that I've been at. And because of that, we are trying to insert ourselves into a narrative that doesn't fit the usual mainstream news story. Oftentimes it's always been told in a very binary way or even singular way. And Asian Americans, Filipinos are just not part of that story. Allison had mentioned the incident in 1999. It was a big story out here in Los Angeles with the death of Joseph Villeto. That resonated with me back then, and it resonated with me this past week with the shootings in Atlanta. When you look at the coverage of who got the most coverage, the victims were always seemed to be secondary. And when the media focuses on oftentimes the perpetrator or the shooter. And what has contributed to that is, I think, the lack of diversity in newsrooms. I think it's gotten better where we've seen a lot more diversity with reporters, but where newsrooms and leadership can really make a difference is making sure that they are investing in their talent and getting people into decision-making places. And we're not quite there, but if they are really serious, and I'm seeing a lot more support, especially within, the places that I've worked, that have reached out and said, like, what can we do? That is something that's very tangible, and to make sure that if they're serious and being inclusive, then it's crucial that we place people in those roles that can help push to get these underrepresented stories out there.
All right. Thank you, Lizelle, another kapwa storyteller, and thank you for raising concerns that are also close to my own heart. So maraming salamat. I hope to hear more from you a little later. So the next part of our discussion is going to pertain to the impact on Filipino Americans of what's going on in America today, especially with the kind of mood that a lot of Americans are in. This is a question for attorney Chris Lapinig. How has the Filipino American community been affected by anti-Asian hate? Attorney Lapinig.
Thank you, Howie, and magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. My name is Chris Lapinig, and I'm the proud son of Filipino immigrants. My mother grew up in a working class family in Paco, Manila, and moved to New York in 1982 as a nurse. My father, who was born in Cebu, moved to New York in 1978 with his family due to martial law. I went to Yale for college and law school and became the first lawyer in my family. And I spent 4 years working at an Asian American civil rights nonprofit serving Filipino victims and survivors of human trafficking. I want to start out by reminding everyone that, as Allison alluded to, only 100 years ago, it was common for businesses to post signs that said, or businesses in California to post signs that said no Filipinos allowed. And only 120 years ago, Filipinos became subjects of American imperialism after 4 centuries under Spain. And for much of American history, Filipinos have been erased, as the previous speakers have alluded to. We're not Black or Chinese or Japanese, and unfortunately, the history of racism against Filipinos has been lost to much of the public, even to many Filipinos. And as a result, we've come to occupy a liminal space in American race relations, and we're often framed in reference to other racial and ethnic groups. For example, another Filipino American that I know spent time teaching in rural Louisiana, where people rarely encounter Filipinos. And one of his students, in a fit of rage, called him a quote, Chinese Mexican Jackie Chan wannabe. And I tell this anecdote to reflect that many Americans literally don't have the word Filipino in their vocabulary, but view us in reference to other groups. The main point that I want to drive home tonight is that anti-Asian and anti-Filipino hate are rooted in white supremacy and anti-Blackness. There's something called racial triangulation theory that posits that Filipinos and other Asians are viewed in relation to white people and Black people. We are seen as not white, but also not Black. Like other Asians, we're viewed as something in between, while also being perpetually foreign. And we've been long framed as savages, often in reference to anti-Black and anti-Indigenous sentiment. And Filipinos literally were put on display in a human zoo at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. And during colonialism, it was not uncommon for American soldiers to refer to Filipinos with the N-word. Just as a personal anecdote, I once interviewed for a prestigious scholarship for immigrants and children of immigrants. During my panel interview, the head of the foundation, a white man in a position of power, asked me why I'd been chosen to head the Asian American Students Alliance in college. And he literally ranked all of the ethnic groups, the Asian ethnic groups that he could think of. He put Indians at the top because they are, quote, so articulate, and Chinese were next because they're, in his words, quote, really hardworking. Toward the bottom, he put Filipinos, and then he asked me, why would they choose a Filipino to lead a group that represented all Asians? And I was shocked that someone would ask such a flagrantly racist question in an interview, and I really didn't know what to say. But his ranking, in my opinion, is a reflection of white supremacy and anti-Blackness. He was triangulating Asians as not white and not Black, and then ranking Filipinos and other Asians based on our proximity to whiteness and our distance from Blackness. I think as Filipinos, we need to think about how we can fight white supremacy, yet sometimes ourselves, we are complicit. We are complicit in white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and even self-hate when we buy products to whiten our skin and comment negatively on darker skin. We are complicit in these forces when we value European noses and other white physical features over more Asian features. We deny ourselves self-love and reinforce white supremacy when we do these things. I've spent several years advocating for Filipino Amerasians who are children of US soldiers who by and large remain in the Philippines. And unfortunately, many Amerasians, especially those who are part Black, experience a lot of discrimination in the Philippines for being mixed race and for their skin color. And their experience reflects the extent to which we as Filipinos have internalized white supremacy and anti-Blackness. So I guess the thought I'll leave you with is that if we're ever to defeat anti-Filipino hate, we need to come to grips with how much we've internalized these forces. And to do that, we need to embrace love for oneself, love for fellow Filipinos, for other Asians, and for other races, especially Black people and other people of color. I think we should embrace the spirit of Kapwa, but recognize that Kapwa represents unity not just with other Filipinos, but other Asians and other races as well. The Black community, for example, has long been an ally in fighting anti-Filipino hate. There was at least one African-American soldier who was sent to help the US conquer the Philippines that defected and joined the Filipinos resisting American colonialism instead. And so, yeah, the last thing I'll say is just, I think we'll unfortunately continue to face anti-Filipino violence if we don't overcome white supremacy and anti-Blackness. Our struggle against anti-Filipino and anti-Asian hate is very much bound up in the struggle for Black liberation. We must fight white supremacy and anti-Blackness if we're ever going to stop anti-Filipino and anti-Asian hate. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Attorney Chris Lapinig, for those painful truths. It's painful to hear about and to think about, concepts like self-hate and being complicit in some of the oppression aimed against Asians and Filipinos in particular. So a key to overcoming is, as you said, changing ourselves and our attitude towards ourselves and our general. So there are things that are within our control. So thank you for that. Then our next speaker is a psychology professor based in Alaska, but I think he's currently in Seattle. Professor E.J. David. And our question for him is, how has this recent wave of anti-Asian hate impacted our community's mental health?
Thank you so much for the question, Kuya Howie. But before I respond, please allow me to introduce myself for a bit. Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. My name is E.J. David and my parents are Kapampangan and Tagalog. I am joining you all from the lands of the Dinaina people. I'm not in Seattle. I'm in the lands of the Dinaina people known as Digayakak, or what some people know as Anchorage, Alaska. It is here where I live and work as a professor of psychology at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Now to answer the question, first, as Dr. Tintiangco Cubales shared earlier, Filipinos and other Asian Americans have been experiencing racism for many generations. And those experiences of racism that our ancestors faced decades ago also affect us today. This is what is known as historical trauma. And research suggests that the racism that our ancestors faced generations ago still negatively affects our mental health and well-being today. Now, with regard to what's been happening recently and how the rising anti-Asian violence over the past year has impacted our community's mental health, many of our Kapwa have been feeling anxious, fearful, afraid to go out in public, especially Filipinas and other Asian women who have been especially targeted by the violence. Many of our Kapwa have been feeling sad and depressed, or angry and enraged. Many have been feeling numb or just stuck, or like they can't think clearly. And these are all valid and normal reactions to racism and traumatic events. These mental health effects aren't surprising because the research is clear. Racism can lead to poor self-esteem, lower life satisfaction, more depression symptoms, more anxiety symptoms, substance use, suicide ideation. It can also lead to difficulty sleeping, concentrating or thinking or focusing on things that we need to do, being unable to function in our daily lives. It can affect our work performance, our school performance, and our relationships with our loved ones. But one thing I want to emphasize too is that we as Filipinos don't just deal with the racism that we directly experience. We are also affected by the racism that our friends and family face, and also by other people who we might not even know, but who look like us. So in our case, other Filipinos and other Asians, this is Kapwa in action. Right? In Kapwa, we're all connected. So if we see our Kapwa experience racist violence, that vicarious racism affects us too. So when we see on TV how, our people or people like us are dehumanized, stereotyped, attacked, and murdered, we feel that. It activates our fight or flight systems too. It takes a psychological toll on us. It makes us anxious, stressed out, maybe even scared, maybe even depressed. And these vicarious racist experiences can be traumatizing to us as well. So it's really three different kinds of anti-Asian and anti-Filipino racism that are bombarding our mental health right now. Historical racism, vicarious racism, and the direct racism that we experienced.
Well, thank you, Professor David. As a former COVID patient, I know that mental health is a grossly overlooked aspect of this pandemic. So thank you for making sure it's talked about and we think about it. Our next speaker is a spoken word artist and performer, Tony De La Rosa. Our question for you is, how do you advocate for diversity practices at your workplace? And have you faced any issues related to performative diversity?
Yeah, thank you so much. First, calling in, I'm doing my tradition of calling in from the Cuesta Taíno Seminole land here in Miami, Florida, and representing my parents here today from Pampanga and Cavite. A lot of Kapampangan love out here, which I love. I serve now as director and coach at Teach for America Miami-Dade, and I'm a co-founder of the NYC Asian American Teacher Empowerment Networking and Development Initiative. And on the side, I'm a racial equity strategist. And to answer your question, first thing I go to for any organization that I consult with is, let me see your diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging statement. Let me see what that looks like. What was your commitment look like? Every organization, every company, every school. I work in schools primarily, but I look for that when I go to organizations. And when I look at that, I ask them, who helped co-create this document? What does this look like today? And who is influencing this commitment the most? And then I also ask after that, what does the infrastructure now look like for you? Who owns the diversity, equity, inclusion action and the work? Is it HR? Is it your human resources? Is it a small team, a functional team? Or is it everyone in every functional team, right? And we want C, right? Like if you think about it, ABC, we want C. We want everyone to embody diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging in everything that they're doing. Some things that you can do and to advocate as well is to gather data differently, right? We want to disaggregate data. And what does that mean? We need to cut and organize data and collect it from not just race, from an ethnic perspective as well, because there are very unique stories to Filipino AX Americans, right? So this is super helpful for us to like tell that full story and understand what's going on with that specific unique group. And then obviously leveraging what's going on. For my work at the NYC Department of Education, I'm like, what could help Asian Americans? We have a lot of research on how does Black male teachers help change outcomes for Black students, right? It helps them, if we place the racial matching theory is if we place Black teachers there in front of Black male students, lower dropout rates will happen, right? Which is true through studies from Stanford, from UC Berkeley, from Dr. Travis Bristol's work. And what if we gathered and used that same method to Asian Americans in schools, in districts, right? We can improve outcomes for Asian American students, especially for Asian Americans who are not accounted for always in that big bubble of Asian America. And then in terms of experiencing performative diversity practice, of course, I've worked at schools all over the country and I've seen it. I've seen it happen. I've experienced it. And, I'm getting like in my Instagram, I'm getting a lot of DMs about, hey, Tony, my principal sent a statement out about this, but no action. We need action, right? And when you say that, that's performative, right? That's just saying it to check a box off. But this work is hard. This labor has been hard and it requires you to orient yourself, give us more resources, a budget to help us help our community out in our schools and our communities and companies, and to listen and decenter yourself, right? If you're not Asian American in this time. So if I synthesize that, essentially is one, Make sure your diversity commitment, your statement matches your actions. And we really want to focus on actions. And then 2, decenter yourselves if you're at the top of the leadership and listen to us. We can tell you what we need. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for that advice on how to improve our work environments. We have the next speaker, Anna Marie. How have Asian women been affected uniquely by anti-Asian hate? So it's a gender question for you.
Salamat, Howie. And I apologize, there might be a motorcycle going by my home, but just the reality of today. You know, I am so proud to be an Asian woman, a Filipina, and as I think about just what AAPI women have been doing in the last year, I think of how they have been and continue to be at the front lines of care, especially during the pandemic. My name is Anna Marie Cruz, and I'm originally from Orion, Bataan, and I currently live in Long Beach, California. I'm the founder of Entrepreneurship, which is a platform elevating Filipina entrepreneurs in the diaspora and aligned with a vision that every Filipina deserves to realize her full potential. I also manage a national economic development program supporting small businesses in under-resourced communities across the United States. So even before the pandemic, AAPIs as a whole have been the invisible of the invisibles, and you've heard that from everyone else. In the workplace, AAPIs are the least likely to advance to management roles, and the stark wage gaps that we see for AAPI women are left ignored, partly because of the broad strokes applied to AAPIs as a monolithic community. So we don't have enough time to discuss all the ways AAPI women have been impacted in the last year, but I'll focus on the 2 core issues COVID has exacerbated, particularly in livelihoods and safety. So a recent McKinsey study on AAPIs and COVID shared that in healthcare, Asian Americans exceed their share of the population in high contact occupations in the medical fields as frontline and essential workers. I think many of us know that, having so many nurses and healthcare workers in our families and extended families. In California alone, while Filipinos make up only 4% of the nurse workforce, 26% of deaths are nurses of Filipino descent. Now, Asian-owned businesses are also or have been greatly impacted by COVID, being overrepresented in some of the hardest hit sectors such as food service, retail, trade, and education service businesses. And those have really sustained some of the worst economic impacts from COVID. In terms of safety of AAPI women more directly, increasing racism has made AAPI women more vulnerable to violence, both within their home as well as in public spaces. We've heard of increasing domestic violence, in fact, even reported to the Philippine Embassy here in the US. And unprovoked violence and hate incidents that have been reported to stop AAPI hate since last year, of 3,800 reported incidents, 68% were reported by women. And then, as we saw last week, which served to be the wake-up call to AAPIs and the general community, was the senseless murder of 6 Asian women at their workplace. And what we also witness is the effects of the long history of the fetishization of AAPI women in America, dating back and supported by actual policy, including the 1875 Page Act, which restricted Chinese, Japanese, and Mongolian contract laborers and women. And back then, the Chinese women were considered a threat to the institution of marriage and a danger to white males. So this is just one of the many racist policies enacted in American history. And in fact, the reason we're here today is because in 1790, the Naturalization Act was signed into law, which prohibited non-white people from becoming citizens in the US. And in my own field, the policy that keeps AAPIs from accessing funds for their small businesses is actually included in the definition of eligibility for Community Development Financial Institutions, or CDFIs. CDFIs are critical to providing capital to small businesses, particularly in minority or under-resourced communities. And the definition of eligibility for CDFIs is geographic area meeting the requirements set forth in an established region, or individuals that are low income, African American, Hispanic, Native American, Native Hawaiians residing in Hawaii, Alaska Natives residing in Alaska, or other Pacific Islanders residing in American Samoa, Guam, or the Northern Mariana Islands. Nowhere in there does it say Asian. So the good news is the spotlight is on us now. And sadly, it took 6 Asian women's bodies to bring us here. We do have an opportunity to address the invisibility, the hypersexualization that leads to violence, the unfair wage gaps, and this discrimination in the workplace. There are small acts we can take to uplift each other, increase visibility, as well as impact policy. Demand disaggregated data, which directly impact policy. Demand that the electeds recognize us, and demand that our stories be told.
Thank you, Anna Marie Cruz, for highlighting those important issues. And in particular, I'm glad you brought up the fact that Filipina frontliners have been dying in this pandemic way out of proportion to their numbers. And this is not just in America, but it is all over the world. You know, Filipina medical workers, health workers, nurses in particular, and doctors are working almost in every country of the world. So we're down to our last speaker before we go on to a few minutes of question and answer. We have one of the main organizers of this event, president of PhilPro as well. So she'll be talking about her organization. But she's been a long time performer and theater professional. She's also a talented singer, Luella Cabalona. So your question is, how can we support the Filipino community, Filipino American community during this time? And then what can organizations like yours, PhilPro, do to help combat anti-Asian hate? Luella.
Thank you, Howie. Again, I appreciate GMA Pinoy TV and you, Howie, for helping us have this important conversation. So let me introduce myself. I am Luella Cabalona, and I was one of the 10 inaugural delegates of PhilPro, and I'm the current president of the Filipino Young Leaders Program. Professionally, I am also a senior manager for data and analytics solutions at Blue Cross Blue Shield. And like you mentioned earlier, my second career is as a creative, as a singer, lead singer and creative director of the only Filipino fusion band, Filipino folk fusion band here in Chicago, Sama Sama Project. I'm born and raised in Manila, ang anak ng Pasig, isang tunay na anak ng Pasig. And I moved here, in my early 20s to work, And so to answer your question, how can we support our Filipino American community during this time? I think there's a lot of great suggestions that our panelists have already mentioned. I think one of the things that I would just want to add is, having grown up in the Philippines, there are certain traits of Filipinos that I'm hoping we could kind of like shift, right? We don't talk about negative things. Like, we try not to share about our struggles, about bad things that happen to us. I think this is something that, in a way, also is affecting our invisibility, like a lot of us had mentioned already before. But the good news is, we have close ties within our families. I can tell you that here in America, right, a lot of families have their lolos and lolas living with them, and along with their parents and maybe titos there. I think it is important for us to discuss this issue with the elderly. I think us being in online 24/7, we are very aware of these acts of violence that are happening around the Asian American community. But I want to make sure that we are embracing everybody else. Not everybody is online. And so I think it's very important for everybody listening today who have families in their homes, who have relatives in their homes that are older, to make sure that they include them in the conversation, and also urge them to report hate crimes. Like, tell the story. If something happens to them going to the grocery store, tell it to their children and report that. I think that's one of the important messages that we want to have in this forum. In terms of what PhilPro is doing, I think it's very evident in what we have right now. This event here now, Confronting Anti-Asian Hate, was put together by our great team in 5 days. And we had like sleepless nights because we wanted to make sure that we contributed to this conversation. The forum itself is highlighting what alumni and guests like Attorney Lapinig are doing to help Filipinos and victims of crime. Anna Marie is highlighting how we can actually surface how we can have a little bit more representation in small business, especially for women. Tony is a motivational speaker that talks to these injustices that are happening in our community. So this forum itself, and with the help of GMA, we're amplifying the voices of these great leaders. I also want to mention that you don't necessarily have to be in social justice or an attorney or somebody in that realm. Folks like our alumni Kevin Zagala, that is in 2009, he is now working with Compassion in Oakland project to build a mobile app that will match volunteer chaperones with the elderly. So those are things that we'd like to highlight throughout the year to help the community combat anti-Asian hate. I think I just want to end by saying that PhilPro will be committed to surface up these stories, our stories as Filipino Americans, as Asian Americans, and we will also highlight the successes that we have in combating this. And then finally, I also want to recognize that there are other national organizations such as NAFA and Unipro and FANS that are using our collective voice to, to overcome this. It's gonna take us a long time, perhaps even beyond our generation. But while we're talking about it and while we are using our voice together to combat this, I think it is a step forward. Thank you.
Yeah, Luella, PhilPro was envisioned to be an immersion program, but unfortunately, it's hard to immerse ourselves in anything these days, without endangering our safety and health. But, despite the pandemic, you've made sure that PhilPro remains active and relevant. So thank you for your service and whatever you're doing. It's tempting sometimes to just throw up your hands and say there's nothing else we can do, right? But you continue to make sure that PhilPro is of service, and we're moving important conversations forward. So speaking of conversations, we have a few questions lined up. But before we go to the questions, I'm being reminded by my GMA international colleagues to ask our audience to check out some ongoing promos and offers on Altice Optimum, Charter Spectrum, Comcast Xfinity, Cox Contour, Frontier Fios, and Verizon Fios when you subscribe to TV plans and add GMA Pinoy TV to your pack. Visit gmapinoytv.com or follow us on GMA Pinoy TV USA page for more information. Maraming salamat sa kapuso all over the world and especially in America. So we have a couple of important questions. So I'll just combine a couple of them. Basically, there are Filipinos listening in from all over, but one of them asks, what is considered a hate crime? And another person asks, well, the first is from Anne, and the second is from Jackie. Is there a law in the US about hate crime? Please tell us briefly about it. So let's combine those two questions. We have a lawyer, a civil rights lawyer with us today. He'd been an obvious person to answer this question, but anyone can pipe in, right? After Attorney Chris Lapinig. So I'll just repeat, what is considered a hate crime, and what are the hate crime laws in the United States? Just in a couple of minutes, just give us a quick briefer.
Yeah.
Chris, start with you. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. I'm actually not a super expert at this area of the law, but my understanding is that there are federal and state laws that outlaw any sort of violence that is motivated on the basis of protected classes, and so frequently those are race, ethnicity, gender, and sometimes sexual orientation. And so there are additional criminal penalties when someone commits a hate crime in the US.
All right. Does anyone else want to add? A lot of you have been active in community issues that related to anti-hate campaigns.
I think I'd like to quote my colleague, Dylan Rodriguez. He talks about hate crimes as being a criminal category that was created by the US, the FBI specifically, to isolate and individualize violence that's often having origins in behavior of the state itself, including policing, war, and rhetoric. But he also says that it's a lazy term and that oftentimes is wrongly and too often used. He would rather us really name white supremacy, misogyny, anti-Asian violence instead of reducing it to this idea of hate crime.
Yeah. All right.
If I could just add really briefly, I will say though that I think that there is an overemphasis on criminalization, and that we've seen time and time again that criminalizing and incarceration can really work to the detriment of people of color in the United States. And so I think we need to explore, other community-centered solutions to hatred and race-motivated violence.
Thank you. There's a related question actually from a certain Nathan, and his question might resonate with a lot of Filipinos in various parts of the United States today. He says that he and others in his community are experiencing racial slurs in the last year or so. What can we do? Where do we report our experience with racism, and how can this panel and PhilPro help us?
Yes, so I think we mentioned earlier that it's a good thing for us to be reporting hate crimes, and the website Stop AAPI Hate has allowed us to actually get a view of just how much hate crimes we've experienced in the last year. I think they report over 3,000. So that's the best way to go, right? It's stopaapihate.org.
Yeah. Okay. So good. Thank you. There are websites, there are online resources, there are campaigns already. There is a follow-up question on hate crime, and this is currently a debate in the mainstream media. How do you prove hate crime? In fact, there's a lot of discussion about what happened in Atlanta. Whether it was really an anti-Asian hate crime, or was it just a kind of a misogynistic crime, or was it just a crazy person deciding to kill people, or it could be all of those. So basically, it's a good question. How do you prove whether something is a hate crime?
Well, there's a lot of layers to what you just said. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to comment on who is shifting or creating the narrative when a police officer says that the assailant was having a bad day. That completely shapes how this is going to be seen. So I just, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good reminder of what happened then. Professor David, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so it's difficult because hate crimes, you need something explicit and something obvious, that showing that the crime was driven by some form of bias, right? And that's why hate crime legislation or hate crime laws really doesn't work very well, because not all racists will admit that they're racists, right? And same thing with what happened in Atlanta, right? So some people were saying, well, it's not racism, maybe it's sexism, maybe it's misogyny, maybe it's classism. Well, it's all of those things too, right? And then lastly, here's the thing, right? I want to share a quote by James Baldwin, who said, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." Mm-hmm. Right? And, the murders of Asian women, and really throughout the history of this country of violence against peoples of color for many, many years, we've seen what this country has done, right? So it's hard to believe what this country says, because we've seen what it's done.
If I could add just really briefly, I mean, I think Dr. David is right on. I mean, I think that just the difficulties we've seen in Atlanta in terms of law enforcement and prosecutors sort of recognizing that this is motivated by racism, I think just reflects that we can't rely on the criminal justice system to achieve liberation for Filipinos and other people of color, because time and time again, you know, the system has failed us. And if anything, in many ways, the legal system, and I say this as a lawyer, perpetuates white supremacy and racism in this country. And you know, the Atlanta example is a prime example of just where a situation where law enforcement has expressed skepticism that it's about race, but you know, many Asian Americans and many Filipino Americans see that it was 6 out of 8 victims were Asian women, and that we know that racism played a role in the violence that we saw.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Good point. Okay, maybe we can entertain one last question. This one is specifically for Professor E.J. David. Given the negative mental health effects of recent anti-Asian hate, give us some tips. What are some things we can do to protect our well-being, our mental health?
Yeah, so there are many things that must be done, right? Like removing stigma that we have as a community about mental illness, normalizing therapy, advocating for mental health services to be more culturally appropriate and culturally grounded. But what I want to share right now is something that I think all of us can do on our everyday lives, especially as it relates to anti-Asian racism. And one of them is that, you know, again, given the long history of this country, you know, of racism, we must believe what this country has shown us, right? And believe that our experiences of racism and other people's experiences of racism are real. There's no reason for us to question our sanity or doubt our reality and blame ourselves for being discriminated against. We can't let this country gaslight us anymore. Right? So, you know, it helps to have trusted people around us who can validate our experiences, you know, who can, you know, validate our feelings, right? Regardless of what those feelings may be, like sadness, fear, anger, confusion. These are all legitimate responses to racism and trauma. And then the other thing I want to share is that remember that we are not alone. And that we have a community of people today and throughout our history that experience similar struggles, you know, and knowing that can give us strength and help our mental health as well. We can look at our ancestors and our, you know, our long histories of survival and thriving and success, and the fact that our peoples are still here despite generations of systemic attempts to erase us and dehumanize us. You know, that's proof of our strength and resilience, right? Strength doesn't have to just come from inside us. Strength can also come from outside us, from our communities, from our ancestors. It's in our histories. And knowing and remembering all of these things can help with our well-being and mental health as well.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for that comforting advice. Okay, you know, there's still a lot to talk about. We're running out of time, but just for our audience, for the benefit of our audience, we'd like to show a slide now of some organizations that are active in some of the issues we've been talking about. So these are, there's an anti-bullying organization, there's an APIA Vote Civic Engagement, there's the Asian Mental Health Collective.org, National Alliance on Mental Health America. So there's a message also from the PhilPro Board of Directors that we want to show.
Hi, I'm Garrett Bolden, and I am one with the Asian American community in their fight to #StopAsianHate. Being a Filipino American, this Asian hate had an impact on me emotionally, and seeing all these articles and news about Asians being treated badly makes me feel unsafe. And I just want to get it out there that being Asian does not make anyone less of a person or a human being. So let us all unite together, and because when we unite, guys, We are hashtag stronger together.
Right.
Hi, I'm Garrett.
Yeah, I was reminded that before the final message from PhilPro, we have two messages, one from Garrett and the next one is from Tom Rodriguez.
My name is Tom Rodriguez, and I am one with the Asian American community in their fight to stop Asian hate. Being an Asian American myself, who lived half of his life in the United States, I too have seen my share of discrimination, but never to the extent that I've been seeing in the news recently. You know, it's really saddening to think that despite all of the commonalities that we share under our skin, some of us are still driven by hate, fear, and anxiety. I hope we all see that ultimately in this world that we share, we are one, and that we are stronger together. Please, stop Asian hate, and stop hating in general. My name
As the country grapples with the COVID-19 pandemic, Asian Americans and Pacific Islander communities are also facing an alarming rise in anti-Asian violence, racism, and discrimination.
Asian Americans are facing verbal assaults, physical attacks, and threats to their lives. Our most vulnerable people are being targeted. Elderly in precarious living situations, workers in low-wage jobs, and women.
On this virtual day of action, uplift the Asian American community by sharing your commitment to stop Asian hate.
It requires effort, both big and small. Doing your part means offering financial help and other support, holding yourself and your community accountable for demeaning language and racist jokes.
Here are some other concrete actions you can take. Support existing AAPI-based social justice organizations and initiatives such as Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta, Stop AAPI Hate, the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, AAPI Force, and AAPI Women Lead.
I am urging Congress to pass Congresswoman Grace Meng's COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act and Congressman Don Byers' Jabara Hire No Hate Act.
Donate to the victims of the violent acts and their families, and provide financial support to campaigns for Asian American communities.
I am urging CEOs and business leaders to condemn anti-Asian racism in the workplace and pledge corporate giving to AAPI-led community organizations to address long-term needs.
Build your skills by taking harassment intervention training for bystanders and for those experiencing harassment.
Urge elected officials to build out local Asian American advisory councils from business leaders, frontline workers, community leaders, and youth activists.
Publicly condemn racist language, the racist association between the virus and the Asian community.
Read up about Asian American history. Learn about our struggles, especially against discrimination, and know our achievements.
And finally, check in with your elderly and your Asian American peers. Ask them what you can do to support them. We are all in this together. We are Filipino, we are Asian, and we all belong here.
And we have a message that I'll read from GMA Network, one of the organizers of this event. GMA Pinoy TV is one with PhilPro, the Philippine Embassy to the United States, and the entire Filipino and Asian communities in the United States in stopping Asian hate. Watch the coverage of this event here, now, confronting anti-Asian hate on GMA Pinoy TV. For more information, visit gmapinoytv.com or follow us on social media at GMA Pinoy TV. Just want a reminder for those who can stay after the formal part of this event for the question and answer from our reporter. That's going to be edited. It won't be live anymore. But before we go on to that and close this program, I've been asked to just kind of try to recap and deliver a final message. As mentioned in the introduction earlier, I grew up in the United States myself, but I decided to live in the Philippines more than 30 years ago. So I feel quite removed from some of the issues that have been discussed, but they resonate very strongly with me because I was reminded of a lot of my own interactions with the larger community in the United States when I was in elementary school. This is during the Vietnam War, when all Asians were considered part of the enemy. You know, they didn't know what Filipinos were in the 1960s and 70s, but they knew who Vietnamese people were, Japanese, Chinese, etc. So it's kind of there's a bit of a deja vu that I'm hearing from your experiences out there. And in college, I did my thesis on Carlos Bulosan, who wrote a lot about these issues that we've been hearing about that's going on today, which is, I think, kind of sad because Carlos Bulosan experienced all these, racial incidents back in the 1930s, and we're still seeing some of that today. So, but as some of the speakers have mentioned, crisis breeds opportunities. And despite what we're going through today, the anti-Asian hate, anti-Filipino hate, which is related to the pandemic, which is also the biggest global crisis we've seen in our lifetimes. They offer opportunities as well, as many of you have described. There's opportunities to build community, opportunities to build solidarity with other Asian communities, because as some of you mentioned, there's no such thing as a monolithic Asian community. We're very, very diverse, and yet we face common challenges. There's an opportunity to advocate for more representation. And I just wanted to mention that, one achievement I've been hearing about is the nomination of Attorney Rob Bonta in California as Attorney General, which is usually a stepping stone to even higher positions in the United States. So that's something that's been very promising in the last couple of weeks alone. And finally, this crisis is an opportunity to kind of flex, focus on common concerns and show our influence and show our power. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. No? Thank you. I learned a lot. I've met some of you in the Philippines. I hope to see all of you in the Philippines again someday when this pandemic is over. But I'm glad to see all of you now online. So maraming salamat. I'm sure our audience also learned a lot. Thank you, PhilPro. Thank you to all the panel speakers. Thank you, Philippine Embassy in Washington, Ambassador Romualdez, who took time to talk to us live and listen in on some of the speakers. And thank you to my colleagues at GMA International. Maraming salamat. Again, a reminder to stick around for the one-on-one or the group conversation with our reporter from GMA News. So, mabuhay kayong lahat. Maraming salamat. Stay safe, everyone. See you in the Philippines.